The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
And off we go for 3 hours today. Tony's taking today off. I know he usually works on Wednesday, but schedule a little bit famished this week because of the new year and all that. So doing a Friday show this week, and we got 3 hours today and 3 hours tomorrow. By the way, on Happy New Year, if you haven't heard the Larry David take on this, today is the last day you can wish everybody a Happy New Year. After the 3rd, that's it. Kaput. Done. Wait till next year. Like, you don't want to be wishing people a Happy New Year 2 weeks from now. Even though it seems like it's still a new year. But, you know, Larry's kind of persnickety about that kind of stuff. So, that's why he says, I guess, if you wish somebody a Happy New Year on the 4th of January, you just tell them to F off or something like that. I don't know. But that's a topic for another time. There's a lot of sports to get into today. Both Maryland and Georgetown played last night. They played at home. Both played league games. Both lost by double digits. Interesting comments from the two coaches. We'll play some of that coming up. Also, I've been digging through these great interviews that Joe Buck did that have surfaced on YouTube, and he's got one with David Robinson, which is fun to listen to. David Robinson is an incredible story of a guy who grew up in this area, Northern Virginia. His father was in the Navy, and he was kind of a nerd. He didn't want to play basketball, and because they moved, he showed up at a new school in the 12th grade, had not played basketball since like junior high, shows up in the 12th grade. I think it was Osborne Park, if I'm not mistaken, Northern Virginia. And the coach sees him. He's 6'7", says, "Hey, do you play basketball?" He says, "Well, I did." He said, "Well, why don't you come out again?" So he came out and played on the team, and wasn't that great, but good enough to get noticed by a few schools. And since his father was in the Navy and the Naval Academy showed interest, he went there, and he grew to be 7'1" and became the player of the year, the number one pick at the draft, helped the Spurs to win 2 championships, and was on the dream team and is now in the Basketball Hall of Fame. I mean, those kind of things just don't happen, but it happened to David Robinson, and he tells his story to Joe Buck, and we'll play that in the next hour. Also, a lot of college football talk, of course, with the championship game coming up on Monday night. Paul Feinbaum with the breakdown of that. He was on yesterday on our morning show, and you know, he's been very, very critical over the years of Jim Harbaugh, and said at one point when they got hit with probation, or he got suspended, however you want to call it, got hit by the not by the NCAA though. It was, I guess it was it the Big Ten or Michigan, whatever. He sat out the last 3 games of the season. And with the sign-stealing scandal that was going on, Feinbaum says if they win the national championship, it's tainted. Well, he's changed his stance on that, and we'll get to that in the next hour as well. And Aaron Rodgers and Jimmy Kimmel, that's a cat fight that could wind up in court and could wind up with very interesting ramifications for Disney. And we'll talk about that and much more as we continue. Before we get to the college basketball from last night, I did want to mention this, and it may not mean much to you if you're younger, but it means something to me for personal reasons, and that is that Frank Ryan has died at the age of 87. He had lived in a nursing home in Connecticut and had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Frank Ryan finished his NFL career as a quarterback here in Washington, 1969, 1970. I think played in maybe 2-3 games over that period because Sonny Jurgensen was healthy those 2 years. It was the Lombardi year in 1969, and then Lombardi died just before the 70 season. Bill Austin was the interim coach, and I think they won 6 games that year, and Sonny stayed healthy. So he didn't play, and then he retired, and he was truly a mathematical genius. He got his Ph.D. from Rice, where he had played college football while he was playing in the NFL. Went on to teach math at Case Western Reserve when he was playing for the Cleveland Browns, and later at Yale and at Rice, and is credited with helping create an electronic voting system that modernized the U.S. House of Representatives. He was truly a genius and a Ph.D. He was Dr. Frank Ryan. And it's personal for me because he lived in Chevy Chase after he came to Washington and stayed here for a long time after his playing career ended. And he had two sons. Well, two of the four sons that he had played football with me at Bethesda Chevy Chase. They were better than I was. I wasn't hard, but not really good enough to be college players. I think one of them wound up like playing briefly at Dartmouth or something like that. But they were not going to be NFL players. But really good guys, smart guys, and went on to do other things with their lives. But I got to know them very well and liked them very, very much. And the older one, who they called Poncho, because he was Frank Ryan Jr., used to tell me funny stories about what went on with the Cleveland Browns. Now, the amazing thing about Frank Ryan is that he was the last quarterback to lead the Browns to a championship. They've never been to a Super Bowl, both as I guess you could technically say they won 2 Super Bowls because they were the Cleveland Browns, now the Baltimore Ravens. But between the expansion Browns and the Browns that played in Cleveland, they have never been to a Super Bowl, but they did last win. Now we're coming up 60 years now since their last championship. The 1964 title when they won at Baltimore 27-0, and Frank Ryan threw 3 touchdown passes in the second half to Gary Collins, who played at the University of Maryland. The amazing thing about that year and also 1966 for Ryan, he played 6 years and made the Pro Bowl, 7 years with Cleveland, made the Pro Bowl 3 times. The amazing thing is he led the league in passing touchdowns twice. The first time, 64, with Jim Brown. With Jim Brown, who's the greatest running back of all time, and at a time where the running game was valued more than anything else in the NFL, he led the league in touchdown passes. Now, you can say a great running game opens up a passing game, and it probably does. But I don't think he gets enough credit for how good he was as a starter with both the Rams and the Browns. He was 52, 22, and 2. And probably because he played with Jim Brown, doesn't get the credit that he deserves. But just an amazing story. Now, the Alzheimer's is going to be interesting on the follow-up in this regard. The family believes that he has CTE, and that played a role in his death, and they have donated his brain to Boston University's CTE Center for study. This is one of the most brilliant people who ever played sports, and now they're going to find out if in fact, all the hits that he took playing football played a role. He also, one other note that you may remember about him when he played here and the years that followed, his wife, Joan Ryan, was a trailblazing sports writer. She got a column in the Washington Star twice a week. She wrote, she wasn't at a time, and this is like before people like Christine Brennan came along, she couldn't go in the locker room and didn't fight it. She would arrange one-on-one interviews after games with players, and she would write her own columns. And she was very, very highly regarded, and later worked for the Washington Post for George Solomon, one of the really true trailblazers in sports writing, and probably doesn't get the credit she deserves for it. I believe they later divorced, and she married a broadcaster named Barry Tompkins, and I think still lives in San Francisco. But at a time when you just didn't see women sports writers, there was Joan Ryan twice a week in the Washington Star, and it was particularly interesting for me because I knew 2 of her sons, and that was really a cool thing. So rest in peace, Frank Ryan, someone who probably won't be recognized as much as he should be, but someone that I was very much aware of when I was young and remember him very well. I even remember him playing as briefly as he played. He did get into a couple of games for the Redskins, just kind of in mop-up duty for Sonny Jurgensen. All right, to the basketball last night, and I don't think this is any surprise. It was a little frustrating that I couldn't watch it because it was on Peacock, and I know, old man, get Peacock. You got to get with the times. Everybody has all these streaming services, but I just have my price point and what I'm going to pay for television since I grew up having it for free. But anyway, I did listen to Johnny Holiday and Chris Nocky and Walt Williams last night in a game that really was never in doubt. Like, Purdue jumped out, I think it was an 8-0 lead, and pretty much the entire game they maintained a double-digit lead. It was 13 at the half. It got up to 20 in the second half, and they wound up winning by 14, 67-53. And this is the number 1 team in the country. Now, last year when Purdue was number 3, they beat them, and they beat them by the same margin last year, by 14 points. But as Kevin Willard says, this is really a different team than the Purdue team they saw last year.
You go up against a team like this who's playing really well, who's by far the best team in the country. It's not even close. If you look at their schedule, you look at who they've played, where they've played, it's the best team in the country. But for them to come in here and do this to us on our home court, that should be a little bit of an eye-opener for everybody.
Now, he's claiming that they will be a better team next month. You know, he did say after they got off to that rough start where they lost 2 early season games to cupcake teams in a tournament that they would be better, and they have been better. Their shooting is still a problem. We'll get to that. But he says by the time they get to next month, they'll be better. We shall see. Some of the numbers from last night. Let me get to the box score here as Maryland didn't shoot well again. But, you know, the key going into this game or any team that plays Purdue has to be able to at least control Zach Edey, who was player of the year last year, probably will be again. He's 7'4". He's developed a few more wrinkles in his game that's made him even better than he was last year. So he played only 34 minutes, took only 13 shots, and had 23 points and 12 rebounds. And this is Willard on facing Edey, saying it's pretty much like being a one-legged man in a butt-kicking contest.
We fared just like everyone else has this year. Not well. He's much more improved. I think his conditioning has improved from last year. He's going over both shoulders a little bit better. And he's a willing passer. So you put that body, that skill, those hands, and 4 guys that can shoot around him, he's tough to guard.
Yeah, he's tough. He's tough. If this were 20 years ago, he would be in the NBA now. But big men are not as valued in the NBA as they used to. Now, as far as Maryland's scoring, they did have their top scorer, Jahmir Young, back. He had missed the last game because of illness. He wasn't fully himself, but he gave it what he had last night, what he finished with, 26 points, 12 of 23 from the field, 2 of 6 from 3, and three-point shooting is a disaster. But problem that Maryland's had when they play teams with legitimate size and legitimate big men, not when you're playing teams like Coppin State, Julian Reese doesn't give them much, especially offensively. Reese was on the floor for 34 minutes last night. He produced no points. He did not get to the free throw line. He was 0 of 4 from the field. He's had games this year where he scored 1 point. Here's Willard.
That's pretty much our biggest issue. We've struggled. He's kind of struggled at times. He struggled at Indiana a little bit in the first half, and he struggled obviously tonight. I think we got to do a better job of trying to help him get some easy buckets at time to kind of loosen him up. But they did a really good job. They knew we were going to try to go into him. They loaded up the paint. They made it really hard for him to get deep post touches. But Julian's got to realize that he's number 1 on the scouting report, and he's got to bring it a little bit more than he has the last couple games.
Yeah, bring it a little bit more would be an understatement. 0 points. 0 points in a game where you have to have some inside scoring. I realize you got a big focus on controlling Edey, and 23 points is not the worst thing that can happen to you in a game like that, but you got to get some production from the middle, and they're not getting that. And then the same old story on shooting. As a team, they shot 33% from the field and 22% from 3. And this is the Kevin Willard that we're getting to know, by the way. Gary Williams had some sarcasm. Willard's got a lot of it. So one of the reporters suggested, maybe finding a way to get more open threes. Here was Willard on that.
Well, we missed 7 wide open threes in the first half. So I don't know how much more we can do when you get a wide open shot. I'll try to put a new play in to get a wide open shot. Maybe that will help.
Okay, so that's that. And I don't know why the Big Ten does this. I know that you got to have programming for the Big Ten network, but it just doesn't seem to make sense that they're playing the next game at 5:30 on Sunday, right as we're coming down the stretch for playoff positioning. Not that what Washington does against Dallas matters, and you got to be a real diehard like me to be watching the game, but seemed to me that you'd want to put it on at another time than 5:30 in the afternoon on a Sunday, on the final Sunday of the NFL. I don't really get that. I mean, the playoff games are going to start later in the day. Play one of these games at like noon on a Saturday, something like that. But wow, starting this game at 5:30 as these late games are in the teeth of it in the second half. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that's Maryland's next game. They're going to be on the road at Minnesota. Now, as for Georgetown, this is going to be a tougher climb this year, even than it was last year for Kevin Willard at Maryland, where you got Ed Cooley coming in a complete rebuild situation. I mean, Patrick Ewing, in a way, did a service to the program with that miracle run to the NCAA tournament when they won the Big East during COVID in 2021. And that got him a contract extension. You had to keep him around another couple of years, and he only won, 6 or 7 games in each of those last couple of years. And so Ed Cooley comes over from Providence, and I'll tell you one thing, he always wins the press conference. He's great at that, but he's got a real rebuild on his hand. And last night they played Creighton, and I think one of the key numbers from that 77-60 loss is attendance at Capital One Arena, 4,980. Less than 5,000 people for a league game. And it's a 7 o'clock start on a Tuesday. I know that maybe people are tired from staying up the night before watching the NCAA or the college football playoff games. Maybe there's that. But that's one thing he's got to build. He's got to build a bigger crowd there. And they have to play defense. Creighton out-rebounded Georgetown 42-21. So they doubled them up on the glass, and they shot 63% in the second half. Here's Cooley.
We're not going to win games if we can't be better defensively as a unit. The word collectivity defensively is so important. And right now, game 14, we should be better than this defensively. It's an embarrassment the way we're guarding right now. It's an absolute embarrassment, so we got to address that and hopefully fix that before Saturday's game. I mean, we got to find a way to win a game.
Well, they're playing against DePaul at home on Saturday at noon. Weather's supposed to be kind of crappy, so we'll see what kind of crowd they get for that. But yeah, he's got a tough task, and it's going to take him a while to build things up. But I really like to listen to him. He does among the best press conferences I've ever heard. Coming up, Aaron Rodgers, and it said something yesterday on the Pat McAfee show, which could wind up in court. We'll see. We'll see where that goes. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Coming up in the next hour, what Ron Rivera says about his legacy. Also, if you missed Paul Feinbaum on our morning show yesterday on Disciplined, he said some things about Michigan that are different than what he said in the past, and he now likes Michigan to win the national championship on Monday night. We'll get to that and a whole lot more. This came down late yesterday. It's the usual chicken bleep move from the NFL. You probably have seen the video of David Tepper, the owner of the Carolina Panthers, tossing what appears to be a drink in the direction of Jaguars fans from his open-air suite at Jacksonville over the weekend, frustrated by what was going on. And so the NFL last night fined him $300,000 for what they called his unacceptable conduct. He should have been suspended. I mean, come on. We just saw the end of the worst tenure of ownership in probably in sports history here, the 24-year reign of terror of Dan Snyder. And the NFL should learn from that. You got to nip this stuff in the bud. Tepper's a relatively new owner. He's been on the job 6 years, and he's fired 3 different coaches. He's fired 3 of them since 2019, including Frank Reich after a 1-10 start this year, and Matt Rule after 1-4 last year. He's 31-67 since he took over. He's been behind some horrible trades, like trading 2 first-round picks and top receiver DJ Moore to the Bears to move up from 9th to select Bryce Young, who's maybe going to develop into a good quarterback, but who knows? Now, there's precedent for this in that in 2009, the late owner of the Tennessee Titans, Bud Adams, was fined $250,000 for making an obscene gesture at Buffalo fans while celebrating a victory. But this is almost assault here. I don't even know. Maybe the true definition of it is assault. If he threw a liquid at somebody, and it could have been acid. Now probably wasn't, but I don't know if this ever got in court where this would go. But the NFL is the owners own the NFL. And Roger Goodell works for the owners. And Roger Goodell is the arbiter of justice. And in this case, he said, $250,000 in 2009 for delivering the finger. A drink is a little bit worse, so we'll fine him $300,000 and we'll be done with this. Tepper said in a statement he is, quote, passionate about his team but regrets his behavior. I should have let NFL stadium security handle any issues that arose. I respect the NFL's code of conduct and accept the league's discipline for my behavior. Why not? He's worth $20 billion. What's $300,000? And really, if you follow this stuff, there's really a question as to whether these fines are actually collected, because there's nobody who could check into it. The NFL keeps this stuff very secret. This is publicly a fine for $300,000. What if he doesn't pay it? Is the league going to go after him and make itself look even worse by chasing the money? I don't think so. But this is the new Dan Snyder. I mean, from my perspective, as a fan of this football organization that's now called the Commanders since 1966, for nearly 60 years, it feels good to look at some other owner and say, boy, that's really bad. Man, your team really has a rough ownership situation. That's really stinks. And so that from that standpoint, it feels good. Jimmy Kimmel is up in arms because of what happened yesterday on the Pat McAfee show. Now, Aaron Rodgers is a guest every Tuesday, and reports are he's being paid $1 million a year. $1 million a year just to sit on his couch and gab it up with the boys on the Pat McAfee show. Now, as I understand it, he's paid out of McAfee's pocket, not out of Disney's pocket. But he is part of the show, and the show is part of Disney. So Rodgers was on the show yesterday, and he's explaining how the official colors of the Super Bowl logo told the last two matchups. And he's looking at the colors this year, and you're seeing purple and gold, and he's thinking, Ravens and 49ers. And then, it sounds like out of nowhere, I didn't hear the whole conversation, but out of nowhere, A.J. Hawk, former linebacker with the Packers and a part of the show, part of the McAfee show, asks a question: does this have something to do with the Jeffrey Epstein list about a pedophile? And this is what Aaron Rodgers said.
That's supposed to be coming out soon. Look,
this guy's been waiting in his wine cellar. Yeah. I've been waiting in my wine cellar for this thing.
A lot of people, including Jimmy Kimmel, are really hoping that doesn't.
All right. Obviously, a clip from this particular program was run on Jimmy Kimmel's show whenever Aaron brought up the list, and then Jimmy mocked him for it. Mm-hmm. Aaron has not forgotten about that, but here we are, sitting right in front of that nice bottle of scotch. Mm-hmm. What do you say? I'm waiting to celebrate something.
Oh, yeah.
He's been waiting.
That's
for
the one.
You've been waiting.
Hey, I'll tell you what, if that list comes out, I definitely will be popping some sort of bottle.
Wow. Remember this. Kimmel called Aaron Rodgers a tinfoil hatter for wondering if the U.S. government UFO disclosures were a distraction from the ultimate Epstein revelations. So that didn't go over well with old Aaron, and so now he is. And this to me is slander. I mean, if you're suggesting that Jimmy Kimmel is on the Epstein list, that's slander. There's basis for a lawsuit, and Kimmel came firing back on Twitter. I can't use the exact word that he used, but it rhymes with glass bowl. He said, "Dear blank, for the record, I have not met, flown with, visited, or had any contact whatsoever with Epstein, nor will you find my name on any list other than the clearly phony nonsense that soft-brained wackos like yourself can't seem to distinguish from reality. Your reckless words put my family in danger. Keep it up. We'll debate the facts further in court." And so now Disney has not commented on this because they're in a ticklish situation. The Pat McAfee show is owned by Disney, right? He works for them. That's under their umbrella. The Jimmy Kimmel show is ABC. That's under the Disney umbrella. What do they do here? Now, the McAfee show, you're walking on eggshells when you hire that show anyway, because they made their mark on on streaming, really, and they could say whatever they want. Now they've stopped dropping F-bombs, and they do drop the S-bomb from time to time, but they've cleaned it up a little for ESPN. But you've got somebody on a show that's owned under the Disney umbrella who's slandering a key employee for Disney, the Kimmel Show. I watched ESPN in the past on this, and what they try to do is they try to make it go away as quickly as they can. Going back 20 years when you had the situation with Donovan McNabb and Rush Limbaugh saying what he said, that the liberal media wants him to succeed because he's a black quarterback, and initially, that's Rush, and then the heat cranked up, and Tom Jackson, African American former player, on the set at the same time said he was going to quit if they didn't get rid of him. So then they got rid of him. So they react to the reaction, and that's the way this is going to go. They will react to whatever reaction there is from all of this. More television, a cute little interview that was done at USA Today today, with Scott Hansen, who does, I guess you could call it my favorite television show. When the Commanders aren't playing, I watch the Red Zone on Sunday. Generally, they play at 1 o'clock. This week, they're playing at 4:25. So I'm going to watch 3 hours plus of Red Zone before the game comes on. And I think Scott Hansen does a great job at that. And it's great what they do. Take you from game to game to game, and there's no filler. I call it the lump crab meat of football. There's no filler. You just get the pure action of the games, no commercials, nothing like that. And he does a great job of taking you from place to place. He has a catchphrase when he gets to 3 o'clock, and it's called the witching hour, where all the games, most of the games being played at 1 o'clock, come down to the last hour and the scores change, and things happen there. It's the most dramatic hour of all the hours that they televise. 7 hours, as he says, of commercial-free football every week. And he talked to USA Today, Hansen did, about how this phrase has taken on a life of its own. He calls it a total phenomenon. You can't think of NFL Red Zone without the witching hour. And he said he came up with this in 2014 and added the tagline, "When wins become losses and losses become wins." And he believes he said it first in 2014, and it may have even said it a year before that, or a year or two before that. He came on in 2009, so boy, the Red Zone Channel's been on for a long time, 15 years now. And he said that has become something that people gravitate towards. He says people have a Pavlovian response to me calling it the witching hour. If for some silly reason we forgot to do it, there would be people with torches and pitchforks outside NFL media headquarters, he said. People have started dressing up for the witching hour for Halloween. A couple of couples' costumes could be a variation of one person being a witch and another being a Hansen or a clock. He said that's when you know you have arrived. And he does a lot of these celebrity birthday greetings and so forth on Cameo. And he said at a bachelor party, when fiancés become spouses and bachelors become grooms, one couple about to have a child, when pregnancy becomes labor and labor becomes parenthood. And he says it's wild how it's become this visceral reaction from people in a positive way. Now, Mike Francesa didn't say this recently, but said this about 10 years ago. He said that Brent Musburger was the one who came up with the witching hour. He used to say, "Hey, witching hour, here we go." Then all hell was going to break loose. Through a spokesperson, however, Musburger said he does not recall the origin of the witching hour. And Jimmy the Greek Snyder, who was the point spread guy, the disgraced one, died in 1996, and multiple attempts to reach Francesa for clarity were unsuccessful. Francesa may remember, like Brent saying that off the air. They didn't really have the forum for that, because the way it would work, Brent would come on and give score updates at halftime, but I don't remember this kind of situation where, you're constantly telling people what's going on in games and setting things up and taking you there. But whatever. The witching hour is now part of the NFL lexicon, and you can thank Scott Hansen for that. He was here. He was at what he was Comcast Sportsnet, and now is owned by Ted, but Monumental it's called. But nobody really thought too much of him. He was an okay studio guy, and boy, he found his niche with this. And he does more for the NFL Network, but this is his deal. And, every time you watch him, you wonder, how is he sitting there for 7 hours without going to the bathroom? I wouldn't be qualified to do that job anyway, but that would immediately take me out of the running. No bathroom for 7 hours. Could not do it. Coming up, Ron Rivera on his legacy. That and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. Well, at some point, Ron Rivera is going to be bored. He won't be broke. And whether he'll be back is a good question. Certainly not as a head coach in the NFL. Those days will be over as of late Sunday, as of about 7:30 after the end of the Cowboys game. And so far, he really hasn't come out and said it's over, but we've known it's been over for quite some time. And he was reflective yesterday and talked about his legacy. So I want to go through some of the comments and have my own comments on that. He didn't have a winning season in 4 years. They made the playoffs once, backing in the first year when the rest of the division was horrible. And this was supposed to be a year that they would step up because of his roster building. And in the end, we found out his roster building stunk, that they're not a good team. And placing all your chips in the middle of the table on a fifth-round pick who showed maybe a little bit of promise in the final game of the season last year against a Cowboys team that I thought was disinterested. They had virtually no chance with that game. The only thing they had to play for was the slight possibility that they were going to get the top seed in the NFC and home field in the first round bye, but it was going to take the Eagles losing at home against a Giants team that had nothing to play for. They had already clinched their spot in the playoffs, couldn't move up, so they rested everybody. So by the time the Cowboys took the field last year, they knew that their chances of getting the top seed were just about gone, and they didn't play well at all. And Sam Howell played well enough, and there were times this year where he played okay, but I don't think there was ever a point where you go, okay, tear up the receipt. This is your guy. We're not turning it back in. We're not looking for anybody else. He's going to be our quarterback. And, that chesty comment from Ron Rivera at the beginning of the season that he would be vindicated if they developed Sam Howell and they could send him a Super Bowl ring. Well, that ain't happening. And this is not going to be a Super Bowl team for quite a while as they look to rebuild it. So it's the end. They're playing his song, and he's about to exit stage right. And so I went through some of his comments yesterday. He had about a 7 or 8 minute news conference yesterday. Usually has that on Monday, but because of the holiday, he had it yesterday. Did not say who his starting quarterback will be. That's supposed to be revealed today, and it really doesn't matter whether it's Hal or whatever happens. Brissett, it's inconsequential at this point. Cowboys are almost 2 touchdown favorites, and they have something to play for, so they're going to come in here and probably kick their butts. But this is the melancholy, I guess, the melancholy Ron Rivera saying, yes, he realizes that things could change, but he'll never get over the fact of being a head coach and how much he appreciates the opportunity that he's had to do that.
It's always been an exciting, a thrill, and an honor to be on the field in the NFL. That's for sure. I mean, there's only 32 of these jobs. There's only 32 of these teams, and you always appreciate just that opportunity more than anything else. And again, as I said, you really don't know unless you've been there. And I've been fortunate enough to have been in this position in football, whether I was a player or an assistant coach, coordinator, or head coach. I mean, that's to me, that's pretty cool. So like I said, I've been very fortunate.
Now, you have been fortunate to be employed as long as you have as a head coach with your record. You've had 3 winning seasons. You made the Super Bowl once with the MVP of the league, Cam Newton. Other than that, even the couple of times you made it in Carolina with a losing team, and you made it once here in the playoffs with a losing team. Your best record, 8-1 over 4 years, and you had control of the roster, which you wanted, and you didn't do it. So yeah, you are fortunate to have been a head coach as long as you were with the record that you have. He is now an even 500. His record, I think he says same loss, same number of wins, same number of losses, and 1 tie. So if he loses to Dallas on Sunday, he will leave as a head coach with a losing record. Not by much, but a losing record, and I think it's representative of what he was. Not the worst coach, but certainly not the best. Asked about the biggest disappointment of this year, where he thought it got away. This is what he said.
We didn't live up to the expectations that we had, or that I had personally. I really felt there were some opportunities and some things that we missed, and that to me was probably the biggest disappointment more than anything else, because I really felt we had the makings of enough good players in certain situations that we should have won a few more games.
But that's on you. That's on you. When you are the coach-centric leader of this operation, as he was called. By the way, it was 4 years ago yesterday that he was introduced as the new head coach and president. They didn't call him president, but they called it a coach-centric situation. That was with Dan Snyder wishing everybody a happy Thanksgiving on the 2nd of January of 2020. So it was actually 4 years ago today, and 4 years later, you were supposed to have built a roster that was better than this, and you have not. This is the key moment, he thought, where this season basically was over.
The Thanksgiving game in Dallas, that game was disappointing just because of where we were at one point in that game. You play with the team and you're right there in it, and then it just takes one little simple thing, and the next thing you know, it just kind of starts snowballing.
Yeah, well, it was probably over before that, and you can talk about how close you were in the first half before things got out of hand, but I don't think there was any way they were going to win that game. And Sam Howell, we started to see some really unraveling there, and it got worse after the bye. Remember, they had the bye, and then they played the Miami Dolphins at home, and they got, well, it wasn't a bye, it was a 10-day break because of Thanksgiving, but they played the Dolphins at home, and the Dolphins obliterated them. So there really was no point in this season where I felt, okay, maybe they get hot, maybe they get on a roll. No, really not. This is from Rivera's weekly interview that he does with Chick Hernandez, and Chick did about 8 minutes with him, and this was towards the end of the interview, where the question of legacy was given, and this is what Ron Rivera said.
What happens after that, I got no control over. The only thing I got control over is what happens in the next 7 days, and that's what I'm going to focus on, doing that. I mean, that's the thing. Again, 36 years in the league, I've seen it. Yeah. I've seen things go one way or the other, and so what I'm going to do is just do my job, be true to who I am, and give these players everything I got until Sunday, and then we'll see what happens.
Your legacy here is what, do you think?
About coming in and trying to implement a culture, and I think that's what it is. This was about changing a culture.
But did he change the culture? Did he really do that? This is what he said to the media yesterday.
Well, I'd like to think we're in a better place. It's probably a fair way to say it. I most certainly do appreciate my time here, and we'll see what happens. And again, we'll focus in on what's coming first on Sunday, and that's getting ready for Dallas.
Well, as far as improving the culture, it's hard to say. He's got some good people here. He's got some good leaders. Jonathan Allen, who was here before he got here, is a good leader. Terry McLaurin, who was here before he got here, is a good leader. What else has he really developed? And the Eric Bieniemy situation this year, I think, was a complete disaster. There were points in the season where you go, oh, wow, it's look what he's doing with Sam Howell, and the two of them are together, and you got to move forward with them. By the end of the season, we realized, no, it's not really working out well. And Bieniemy, Rivera really threw him under the bus and admitted that he did before the season started, where he said that players had come to him and complained about how tough he was. Tom Livera's got a column today about, what a disaster the Bieniemy has turned out to be, and he cites the John Keim podcast where Keim says that some players have approached Ron Rivera to complain about Bieniemy's role again late in the season when this was supposed to be smoothed out, and players denied that this was going on, but according to what Keim has, and Keim knows this team better than anybody, he's been covering them as a reporter for probably close to 30 years. He knows these things. Also, what Rivera writes here, there's hardly any difference in production between Bieniemy's offense this season and the one run by Scott Turner, who was fired by Rivera after last season. In 2022, Turner's offense was ranked 24th in the league, having put up 321 points. Bieniemy's offense is ranked 23rd going into Sunday's game, scoring 319. So they were 24th last year, they're 23rd this year, and they've scored 2 fewer points. True, they have one more game to go, but to top Turner, Bieniemy will need Howell or Brissett, Rivera not saying who will start, to deliver more than a field goal in a season finale against the Cowboys team playing for the NFC East title and the number 2 seed in the playoffs when they come to FedEx Field. He says the reality is Bieniemy has failed not just as a head coaching candidate, but as an offensive coordinator as well. The proof is a 4-12 record and a broken young quarterback. So there's that. So has he really changed that with what he's done with offensive coordinator and so forth? Also, Michael Phillips, who now writes for the Times and has covered this team for many years, going back to his days with the Richmond Times-Dispatch, does kind of an autopsy of where they are at the end of the Rivera era and why it didn't work out. And he cites a number of things. Number one, Rivera couldn't be himself. He was dealt 2 immediate blows after taking over the Commanders. He had to work through the COVID-19 season where meetings took place on Zoom and players couldn't do things like eat lunch together. He then was diagnosed with cancer, a year-long fight that left him largely sapped of energy and unable to participate in the ways that he normally does. And that turned things over to Jack Del Rio, who was pretty much running the team and the defense. He also says, emptying the cupboard. Rivera's love is a two-way street. Players are expected to be loyal to his approach and not question or deviate from it. That insistence on culture building led Rivera to import to Washington several veterans from his Panthers teams, though those Panthers teams in recent years were nothing spectacular. Rivera wouldn't budge or make accommodations for Washington players he felt weren't all in on his approach. Notably, he wouldn't enter negotiations with left tackle Trent Williams, who was due for a contract renegotiation and ultimately left for San Francisco. He also let offensive linemen Morgan Moses and Brandon Sheriff leave the building, as well as defensive linemen Ryan Kerrigan and Chase Young. I would say on Trent, there was scorched earth, but if he was truly in charge and truly looking at things objectively, he might have said, hey, wait a minute, this is the best left tackle in the game. I know there's bad blood with Bruce Allen, but Bruce Allen is gone. Let me try and mend those fences and sign him to a contract extension. Didn't do that. Morgan Moses was allowed to walk. He's now starting for a Ravens team that's the best team in the NFL. Brandon Sheriff was allowed to walk to Jacksonville. Jacksonville may be in the playoffs this year and was in the playoffs last year. Also, his draft failures, Chase Young being one of them, second pick of the draft, his first ever draft pick. Also, the big free agent signings, Carson Wentz and cornerback William Jackson III, never came close to their potential as Commanders. Loyalty to assistants, he writes. Evidence began to pile up quickly that Jack Del Rio wasn't getting the most out of the Commanders' defense that was talented on paper but rarely on the field. A third-year surge, largely against subpar competition, kept Del Rio around for a fourth year, but even with an opening day roster that featured 6 first-round picks, the results weren't there. Back-to-back embarrassing losses to the Giants and Cowboys ultimately forced Rivera's hand, but it's time that the head coach, known for his loyalty, moved in reluctantly. The same could be said for Scott Turner, another coach who followed Rivera from Charlotte, who was unable to coach Washington's offense into a win over the Giants or Browns with the playoffs on the line in 2022. And then he writes about his legacy. This is Michael Phillips. He says, when Mike Shanahan was fired as coach at the end of the 2013 season, he said in a statement he felt the team was better off than when he took over in Ashburn. Rivera was asked the same question yesterday and cited the team's culture as being an area that is markedly improved. I kind of like where we are, he said to the team. You know, it's obviously not where we want to be, but it's just the nature of the game sometimes. Rivera's steady hand was unquestionably an asset as the franchise went through a tumultuous period with owner Dan Snyder investigated and ultimately brought out by a group led by Josh Harris. It's possible no coach could have fielded a winner during that time. In the end, Rivera is likely to be remembered as somebody who kept the squad from descending into chaos during some of the franchise's darkest days, though ultimately not somebody who was able to build a winning team amid adverse conditions. And, you know, like they say, you are what your record says you are. And Rivera is exiting here with a losing record, with a team that's a disgrace, that will likely finish the season 4-13. And that's really what you have to look at. So how much did he improve? We don't know. Was it an impossible situation? Yes, it was. But he sort of knew what he was stepping into. Maybe not, you know, what would come with COVID and the reporting by the Washington Post. But when he waltzed with Dan Snyder, he was not unfamiliar with that dance partner. Let me hit another NFL story, which is getting a lot of play now, and that's what happened on Saturday night in the Cowboys win over the Lions, where You had Taylor Decker catch what appeared to be the winning two-point conversion, only for the referee to say, Brad Allen, that he didn't report as eligible. And it looked like the Lions were kind of playing some shenanigans there, because they had two other offensive linemen approach the referee at the time, but it was supposed to be Decker who said he was eligible. So now the league is starting to look at this, and yesterday they distributed video to all teams reminding them that the players bear the burden of ensuring they have properly reported as eligible receivers. So that's going to change. You're going to have players clearly say that they are eligible. Now, Dean Blandino, who is the analyst for Fox, former head of officiating, on Dan Patrick yesterday, in light of what happened on Saturday night in Dallas and some other calls that have been made this season, which are bringing the referees under more and more concern and more fire, this is what Blandino assesses what the state of officiating is as we come to the end of the 2023 season.
Well, I think there's been some high-profile misses. I think you look at this crew, the Brad Allen crew, they've had a tough year, quite frankly. You go back to the Packers-Chiefs game, they've had some situations. I do think the league is using technology more, and I think that's a good thing. Keep the game moving, correct obvious mistakes. But the scrutiny just continues to increase. And I honestly think we're at a tipping point. I think we're at a tipping point with officiating, and where do we want to go from here? Do we need to implement more replay and more technology? My personal feelings is we got to get back to the basics, the core. We're missing pass interference. We're not missing it because of technology. We're missing it either we're out of position, we're not getting good direction, we're not being consistent. So I do think we're at a tipping point. And I think the ownership and as we get into the competition committee process in the off season, I think officiating is going to be a big topic on the agenda.
Okay, but what would be your advice or recommendations of now what should the NFL do? You said we're at a tipping point. Okay, I'm going to make you the commissioner. What do you do?
So for me, I think we've got to take a good look at the officiating department structure. We need to, for very long, it's been officiating is, and for lack of a better term, a necessary evil, right? The officials are important. They're critical to the outcome of the game. But whenever we're talking about it, it's usually negative. But it's such an integral part of what happens on the field on game day. So I think you got to look at the department, look at the structure. Do we have the right people in place? Are we giving good direction? The competition committee process, that process, is there conversation during the season? Are the competition committee members, and it's hard because you've got head coaches, Mike Tomlin, Mike Vrabel, they're trying to win football games. They don't have time to jump on conference calls and do these other things. But can we create a structure where you can have conference calls throughout the season? Maybe it's once a month, whatever it is, to kind of see where we are with officiating. What are the issues? How can we correct it before the season ends, and not just because once the season ends, if we get through the playoffs without any controversy, everybody will kind of tend to forget. We'll get into February and March, and nothing will get done. I do think the league needs to take a good hard look at officiating, the structure, and how we're training these officials.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point. Imagine if this happened in the postseason. That's when we have change, when it's really impactful. And imagine if it happened against the Cowboys, like it went against the Cowboys, and Jerry Jones all of a sudden went on a crusade. Things would change.
No doubt. I mean, we saw the 2018 NFC Championship game with the missed call and pass interference. We changed the rule, and it didn't work. It lasted 1 year. So the playoffs are going to be, and it's unfortunate, but I think the playoffs are that's the key point. If the playoffs go well and there's no controversy, people will forget about the regular season and they'll say everything's great. If we have a bunch of these types of plays in the playoffs, then I think it's all heightened. And then you're right. And especially if it happens, certain teams, more high profile, I think then that drives change.
When the official goes under the hood, how many voices does he hear? How many people are talking to the official?
It is, personally, there's too many voices right now. You have a replay official, you have several people in New York at the league office, and there's probably 4 or 5 people talking to each other. And I think that's too many people. I think it's become more of a committee decision. When I was there, it was myself and the referee communicating through the play, and we were trying to just get to a consensus. Anytime you add more people to the mix, it's going to get harder to get to a consensus. It's going to take longer. You're going to be less efficient. So there's probably 4 or 5 people right now that are communicating during those reviews, and I think they're taking too long.
Yeah, they are taking too long. They've been taking too long forever. Dean Blandino, former head of officiating, now an analyst for Fox, on with Dan Patrick yesterday. So the league did react to what happened in Dallas. They're telling teams, if you're going to have a lineman report as eligible, make sure he makes it clear. But I don't know. There'll be other problems. And the reviews are endless. They take too long. And there's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. I'm not with the people who say, it's too hard to do. Just forget it. Just rely on the officiating. Stop praying to the god of technology. Well, that doesn't happen. They did away with it for several years, and it came back after there were some controversial calls. A New York team, Vinny Testaverde, appeared to score a touchdown. They didn't give it to him, and the league said, we got to bring it back, and they brought it back, and it's with challenges and, the various things that are done today. And I think, too, the big thing for me about replay is this. The technology of television is so different. Back in the day when I was growing up, we had 13 inches of snowy black and white. Now I have 65 inches of HD, and I can see every little single inch. And so egregious calls are much tougher to stomach with the clarity of the picture and the instant replay than they were in the past. So there's no going back, but they do have to find a better way to do this, a wetter way to do this too. Anyway, coming up, we'll get to something that happened 20 years ago today and is near and dear to my heart. Kasem said farewell. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
All right, we got a while to go. Tony's off today and off tomorrow, so it's a 3-hour show tomorrow. He's got another show coming up on Friday. Also, in the next hour, I've been pulling these interviews that Joe Buck did several years ago, and you get some really, really great stuff. And David Robinson's story, as he tells it, is absolutely remarkable. And we'll go through that, how he went from a skinny 6'7" kid who was only playing high school basketball because the coach asked him when he was a senior and saw he was tall, to becoming the number 1 pick of the NBA draft and going on to a Hall of Fame career with 2 NBA championships with the San Antonio Spurs. It's just a really incredible story, and we'll get to that. But I wanted to talk about something that happened 20 years ago today, and it's near and dear to my heart. It may be to yours if you're of a certain age, but there was a show that was on Sunday mornings on WPGC, AM. We only had AM in the car in those days, and when I was rolling around in high school and in college, I would listen on Sunday mornings to Kasem count down the top 40 songs in America. Those were the days when I used to listen to Top 40 radio, and I would hear these songs over and over again. And Sunday morning, I would find out where they ranked on the Billboard chart. And he would set up the records. He would tell little stories about the artists. They didn't have emails then. They had letters. People would send in letters with stories about their families, and they wanted long-distance dedications. Sometimes it was for somebody who was overseas in the military fighting for the country, or maybe it was somebody who, I can't play it, but there's an outtake of him recording the show when somebody wanted to do a long-distance dedication to a dog, and Casey starts spewing out a bunch of words that we can't say on the radio. But he was a mainstay, and it started in 1970. And so that's, the sweet spot of my youth. I graduated high school in 1976 as I was learning how to drive, and we used to play. I was in something called AZA, B'nai B'rith Youth, and we used to play our games on Sunday morning during the season, touch football and basketball and softball. And so when I was driving to the games, I was always listening to Kasem count down the top 40, and I'd sometimes have to get out of the car before they got to number 1, and I'd always be curious. I couldn't look that up on my phone then. You had to be listening to the show to find out what was the number 1 song in America. And he gave it up in the late 90s, he decided, okay, enough is enough. Actually, it was the mid-90s. I think he'd done about 25 years of this, and he thought, okay, I got to turn this over to somebody else. So he turned it over to Shadow Stevens. I don't think that's his real name, but he was a disc jockey, and that didn't work. They canceled the show after like 2 years, and Casey came back. But he, wasn't really into going long-term again. So at the end of 2003, so on this day in 2004, he was turning this over to Ryan Seacrest. Seacrest has every job. Every job in America, Seacrest has it. So Seacrest is now going to take over for Casey Kasem. So this is how it sounded 20 years ago today as Casey Kasem closed it out for the last time.
There it is, the number one song in the USA on American Top 40 for the fourth week running. Hey Ya by Outkast. And there you have them, the 40 biggest hits on the pop chart based on official airplay data provided by Mediabase 24/7. My name's Casey Kasem, reminding you to keep your feet in the ground and keep reaching for the stars.
Yeah, that's what he always said at the end of the show. Keep reaching for the stars. He didn't really stay out of it, though, after that. He agreed to a new contract to continue hosting his weekly adult contemporary countdown, which at the time was called the American Top 20. In 2005, he renewed his deal with Premier Radio Networks to continue hosting his shows, one of which had been reduced to 10 songs and was retitled American Top 10. As you get older, you run out of gas. And Counting Down 40 eventually became 10. And I believe he died about 10 years ago. He did a lot of acting. He was the voice of Scooby-Doo. But for me, the sound of Casey Kasem always reminds me of Sunday morning, driving around on Sunday morning, listening to WPGC and listening to the countdown of the top 40 hits in America. And I guess, I don't know whether it's still running or not. I know on Sirius XM, I don't have it, but friends of mine do, and they do a particular week. They'll just rerun his show. So you might be driving around same time on a Sunday morning, and you may hear an old broadcast of Casey Kasem counting down the top 40 songs of June whatever of 2000 or June of 1978 or 75, whatever it is. And it's just a thing that I feel good about when I hear it, when I hear his voice. And he's been gone now for, I guess, about a decade. But I will never forget Casey Kasem and the American Top 40 Countdown on Sunday mornings, which sort of came to an end 20 years ago today.